Arcane was actually good, wasn't it?
This city was founded to be a bastion of enlightenment.
We are the city of progress, and our future is bright.
Stunning animation that redefines what the form can do, excellent voice acting, a standard of writing that hasn't been seen on Netflix, like, ever. No wonder it took actual years for them to make it. It's had such a positive reaction that I don't even feel embarrassed to admit that League of Legends music rotates into my Spotify not infrequently, and I don't always skip it. There are countless people who can tell you all about how great Arcane is, from its character analysis to the writing to the design details, but wait a second. I'm supposed to be a history channel, and this is a made-up fantasy world based on a video game, and following the story of two sisters as their childhoods are ripped apart by fictional war and actual magic. What am I doing here? Go back to the period dramas and museum visits, you say? No, actually, Arcane has a strong historical spine running through its core, from its world building to its main themes, and it can all be condensed into one word: progress. What we're going to talk about today isn't representations of the past in Arcane, or in other words, how correctly it depicts what happened in a particular time period. What we're going to delve into is how Arcane represents history. That is, the process of history, the philosophy of history, the thinking we use when we try to reconstruct the past in writing or on screen. Arcane is set in Piltover, also known as the City of Progress. Magic and technology have been combined, and this results in rapid changes to daily life in the city as well as the cityscape itself. They mark Progress Day to celebrate Piltover's founding and its history of innovation and invention that has put them on the course towards a better world. Progress. But this progress doesn't reach everyone, and actually what is perceived as progress for some can have a negative impact on others. Because next to Piltover is the Undercity, or Zorn, which is a place of toxic air, crime laws and addiction. It's where our protagonists Vi and Jinx grew up, and they have enough childhood trauma to fill a lifetime, and a good proportion of that trauma relates to the same technology that built Piltover from the ground up. Yay, progress! Progress is a term used to describe the perceived positive change resulting from developments in human invention and thought. In its simplest form, it's the viewpoint that every aspect of life in the past was horrible and miserable, but now with clever technological advances, humans can finally live decent lives and it's only going to get better. But in our world, there's no shortage of examples of how what is progress for some can be detrimental for others. Arcane complicates the narrative of progress by highlighting how new technologies combine with the corruption, greed, and oppression that has always existed to lead to inequality instead of a better world. When I first heard the word progress in this show, I didn't have high hopes for how the concept was going to be interpreted historically. If I'm honest, I was getting war flashbacks to when the tech bros invented history. They were like, let's devalue the humanities so we don't even know the history of technology is a thing that exists. Then let's make it science and monetize it. Never mind that historians have many of the answers but are never listened to, and they also generally stop thinking in terms of progress like 100 years ago. But no, Arcane was thankfully not a repeat of that, but actually a critique of this view on the process of history. The term progress has been used historically to describe advancements towards an undefined final destination, some kind of ideal world. It's part of what's called historical metanarratives, where rather than zoning into a particular event, it's instead thinking about history as a whole and focusing on how it functions as a process, defining it as an overall narrative. Think like how the Pixar theory fits together, but make it all of human history. Another example of a meta-narrative might be saying, oh, history always repeats itself, or people who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. You're imposing an overarching structure onto the giant, complicated hot mess that is the past. The meta-narrative of historical process was discussed around the 18th century during the time of the Enlightenment thinkers. With revolutions in France and America and people devising radical new ways to conduct society, it seemed like the old ways of the divine right of kings and the ancient regime were falling away in favour of new ideas and hopes for a better and more equitable society. This wasn't exactly a new way of thinking. People had thought about the past before them as primitive and generally worse than their time. Early modern historians have described the horrible medieval period in contrast to their own rich time of art and advancement. In Arcane, the anniversary of Piltover's founding is marked by Progress Day, which places the city's ideals as the first step towards progress. It was when a river canal was formed through the city to create a new trade route and to make the city very prosperous. Progress Day marks Piltover's continuing prosperity and it implies the time before wasn't as good. But the 18th and 19th century thinkers went further with this thinking and described the idea of progress. One philosopher was George Hegel, who wrote a very long philosophical study of history. To completely simplify his extremely complicated ideas, his view was that all of human history and all human decisions are governed by reason. Reason dictates a particular path of history, one that eventually leads to some sort of ideal world. With reason, humans naturally wish to progress onto better things, and that's what Hegel identified as happening throughout history. His stages of history begin with ancient Persia, through ancient Greece, Rome, the rise of Christianity, the Germanic world, the French Revolution, and finally to a fully free and perfect world. That kind of suggests the French Revolution was the last stop before perfection, which is... we'll get onto that later. Hegel thought of progress as messy, where the present isn't necessarily better than the past in all aspects. He proposed that history progressed by moving from one extreme to the other. For example, in France, the Ancien regime was an extreme model that oppressed the poor, but then the terror was the extreme in the opposite direction, as anyone opposing the new way went to the guillotine. Only after sliding between extremes could balance be reached and progress in a particular area could be achieved. Once all areas of society had been perfected, then we were on our way to paradise.
This city was founded to be a bastion of enlightenment, in a world that cannibalized itself over power and pride.
These extremes are seen in Arcane. There is the Undercity in Piltover, one a toxic, unsafe place, and the other a comfortable place to live. We see the extreme devastation in the war from the very first scene to the extreme prosperity brought by Hextech later in the series. According to Hegel's theory of reason, this dichotomy should eventually balance out with everyone being able to enjoy Hextech. This is certainly what Jace dreams of. He wants Hextech to help people, including the poverty happening next door to his own home. Over the 19th century, it certainly seemed that Hegel was onto something. The Industrial Revolution had transformed everything, expanding the cities and widening access to resources and commodities. It wasn't perfect, but eventually they figured out it was a dirty water causing the cholera and they fixed it. The same happens in Arcane, where a few years after the implementation of Hextech, the cityscape has transformed. There are tall buildings and blimps everywhere, and it's becoming like our notion of a modern city. In our world, this was when we got the modernists, part of an artistic, social and philosophical drive towards a modern world built on new technological advances. Jace and Victor are like the optimistic modernist thinkers, who believe advancements in Hextech can lead to a better world. Piltover's architecture is like the white terraces of the 18th century redevelopments, and its aesthetic is steampunk using old-fashioned fantasy technology. It's like the turn-of-the-century fantasy futures when people guess what today's world might be like. This situates the world of Arcane in the 19th and early 20th century period, the same time as the height of modernist thinking. Just like in our real world, with so many inventions making travel faster, housework quicker, production more efficient, it seemed like society really was on track towards Hegel's final destination. And then this happened. The very same technology that had led to progress and now led to death on an unimaginable mass scale. Yeah, Hegel had talked about going between extremes, but this was way too much. How could a perfect world come from this? Rather than asking how the next bit of progress was going to unfold, they were wondering what terrible thing would happen next. These have been called modernist events, outliers in history when the then modern world had created the circumstances to initiate destruction on a level never seen before. While not on such a large scale, in Arcane there are some devastating events that happen because of Hextech. In woven scenes, Jace and Victor demonstrate the positive possibilities of Hextech to the councillors, while Vi and Powder experience huge losses resulting from the same Hextech. We see the wonder of progress next to the disaster of it. The 20th century complicated the story of the metanarrative of historical progress. Yes, positive progress can come from new developments, but so can extreme suffering too. Arcane is aware of this dichotomy, and it can't let you sit on the concept of technological or magical progress without reminding you that it can be destructive at any time. Despite that progress and modernism has fallen out of theoretical frameworks today, we still see ideas about historical progress existing today. In technology, the narrative of progress is used to justify wider implementations of new technology, whether out of genuine desire to make society better or as a marketing strategy, or maybe as an attempt to explain the process of history as if no one else had thought about it before. After the time skip, we see Piltover obsessing about progress. They hang on to Jace's words during his speech to find out what developments are planned next. They think Hextech is a brilliant thing, and if you're the one benefiting from it, it probably is. The progress narrative is also used politically and or nationalistically in our world. It's spoken about to bolster the history of someone's own country, highlighting all the world-changing inventions that have come from it, like, our country is better than yours because we overcame this problem before you. Is used to imply how a particular place is better than another and to justify continuing this precedent whichever way. In Arcane, Jace is glorified as the man of progress. It's reminiscent of how certain scientists are revered, like Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin or Albert Einstein. One person represents progress. Arcane assumes the audience might already understand history in terms of progress, and they might have heard about that perspective from these technological or political stances. You don't need to have read Hegel to understand what Arcane's themes of progress is discussing. It meets the audience where they're at in terms of ideas about historical progress, and then proceeds to critique that perspective at every available second. It makes you feel like the 20th century modernist navigating with shock the scenes of destruction resulting from new technologies. So now we've laid out how Arcane incorporates the historical meta-narrative of progress into its world, let's look at what it does to undercut the concept of progress at every opportunity. The concept that Piltover is built on, Progress Day, is immediately problematised. The explosions that were used to create the sea gates through the city went wrong, and the city collapsed in on itself, creating the Undercity. Since then, Zorn has been buried underground in the dark, full of poisonous gases from the explosions and other newer pollution, and generally it's an uneasy place to live. Above ground, however, the new rich built a city over the disaster. It was called Piltover because it was literally built over the pill. This is an explicit portrayal of what is progress for some can be devastating for others. The irony of celebrating such an event is strong. How many examples from the past can you think of where impressive advancements have been built on the backs of the less fortunate? But progress isn't just shown through the most obvious stuff. It permeates the whole series. Jace is celebrated as the man of progress, while Victor, born in the Undercity, is nowhere to be seen. Progress, as some people understand it today, doesn't have time for the people in the background, and especially not from those from marginalised backgrounds. Progress is fine, but only when it is controlled by the privileged. In his Progress Day speech, Jace says, "No one expected anything from me, and yet he lives in the same nice apartment that the kids tried to rob." If Victor and Jace are the modernists, then Heimerdinger represents tradition, or the historian. He warns against reckless progress, and he wants to uphold the old ways. He wants progress to be carried out with care and caution, taking due time to figure out all the issues and find solutions. This clashes with Victor and Jace, who want to get Hextech out in the world helping people as soon as possible. At 300 years old, Heimerdinger runs at a different pace as everyone else, asserting that Hextech needs decades until it is perfected. I think Heimerdinger acts as our historian here. He has the benefit of long-term thinking and an overall view of progress because he was there from the beginning. He sees how rushing into progress can have disastrous results because we don't really understand the consequences yet, and he doesn't want to see that repeating. He's always providing an ethical consideration which everyone swiftly ignores. Because it's hard to justify shutting something down based on evidence that doesn't exist yet. It's easy for a historian to say, well, that was a mistake and you can clearly see it coming because of this other thing 100 years before. But this doesn't reflect what it's actually like to live a human lifespan during a historical period. There are always imminent problems happening right now. Does sitting on your new technology until it is absolutely perfect mean you're failing the people who it could help today?
We can't wait for progress. We need a leadership focused on the future, not the past.
Over in Zorn, Vi and Powder's childhoods illustrate the negative consequences of Piltover's progress. They lose all parental figures due to war and disputes. Vi spends years in prison for no real reason. Powder becomes Jinx, and by the end she has fired her Hextech weapon at the council. And yet when we see the Undercity or Zorn through their eyes isn't just a scene of suffering and despair. It's actually fun and kinda cozy. And yeah, it's not great, but they're always friends. Until they die. Again, Arcane doesn't just sit with the idea that progress only has positive effects for some and negative effects for others. Under Vander there is a sense of togetherness, while under Silco the top layer of Zorn is actually quite nice, but he does that by making half the people underneath addicted to his shimmer. Zorn isn't just statically oppressed by Piltover and its progress. It has its own progress to make too, with more unconventional inventors finding their place here in Zorn instead. Over the series it becomes increasingly apparent what a threat they might become.
The world's growing smaller every day. thanks to the Hex Gates. The Topsiders are leaving us further and further behind.
Because, yeah, Heimerdinger was right. Hextech has consequences that Jace and Victor could never have imagined, and by the end of the series we see how the positives are very good, while the negatives are very bad. Hextech has transformed Piltover. Victor watches it kill Skye, another budding researcher, who looked up to and was inspired by him. If they make Hextech more accessible, it might help lots of people, but it could also lead others to turning it into something terrible. Silco wants to make Hextech into a weapon, and Jinx is actively trying to achieve that. Mel's mum comes over interested in using Hextech to resolve her own disputes before they harm her family again. She reveals the view of Piltover's progress abroad, that it's overly idealistic, not in tandem with reality. Creators lose control of their inventions. Those ideas are out in the world, and time again there will be someone who uses it with violence.
Weapons can't be unmade, and they are always used.
By the final arc, Jace and Victor realise what their technology has unleashed. They didn't intend for Hextech to be used to make weapons, but that's the inevitability. They wanted to solve real issues, not trade disputes, but now they accidentally led to the creation of a terrible weapon. They begin to realise that progress doesn't go hand in hand with positive change.
Love and legacy are the sacrifices we make for progress.
What I appreciate about Jace's character, and all the characters really, is that they don't represent a single solid stance about progress. Like the messiness of real life, they move back and forth with their beliefs and their actions. Jace begins as a pacifist until he becomes a counsellor who has to deal with difficult issues. He decides to solve these issues by force, but then sees the reality of war and negotiates for peace instead. He tries to keep a handle on his invention, but reality gets in the way and it's difficult to make all the right decisions. And with everyone in Piltover glorifying him and Hextech, he doesn't always keep track of his original aims. When Victor and Jace see death resulting from Hextech, they decide it must be shut down, even if that means Victor loses a way to improve his physical condition. But by then it's too late. The power of Hextech has already been released to those who will use it for destruction.
We lost ourselves, lost our dream. In the pursuit of great, we failed to do good.
Nothing about progress is simple in Arcane, which reflects how we think about historical meta-narratives today. If only the mess of history could be structured into an overarching narrative, it would make writing it a lot easier. Although not many of them are on the scale of weapons of mass destruction, there are many examples of new technologies having positive and negative effects on society and culture. Social media connects people with others from around the world, allowing the sharing of stories and ideas that can help people better understand themselves and others. But it also has us all addicted, makes us feel bad about ourselves, and exposes us to graphic images from a young age. What can we do about this? How can we ensure new technologies remain a positive force? Well, don't go to the writers of Arcane for answers, or to the historians for that matter. I think what we have to do is acknowledge that progress isn't linear, and it isn't all good, and we should stop glorifying it. And we should also think twice about accelerating it. But at the same time, where would the world be without people who can think outside the box and take risks? We don't have the benefit of hindsight, and we can't be so cautious that we're inactive. The real issue isn't progress because it doesn't exist, and it isn't technology because it's neutral until it's used. The problem that Arcane highlights is the corruption, greed, and oppression that leads to disputes, violence, and unnecessary suffering. It's the social systems that perpetuate inequality rather than finding ways to relieve it. That is the real villain of Arcane.